Now, the East African nation of Burundi was home to a genocidal civil war in the 90s between the Hutu and Tutsi tribes, which claimed the lives of more than 300,000 people. A new documentary, Deo, Escape from Burundi, traces the harrowing but ultimately inspiring journey of a man from Burundi who fled the war-torn country to ultimately end up studying medicine at Columbia. This is Deo describing how close he came to being killed while he was a student in Burundi in 1993 during the outbreak of the civil war.
So when the militiamen entered the compound of the hospital, they were beating drums, they were whistling, we will finish these cockroaches. Patients were there and everyone, families were running. So here I am under my bed and I saw someone just walking in. So the cockroaches are gone and just left, but he was hiding under my bed. By the time I got out, there's a pile of bodies lying down. People were finished. It was like skin burning. It was smell of burned, meat. Piles and piles of bodies.
Well, to tell us more about this incredible story, filmmaker Ole Schell joins me now. So, Ole, thank you very much for being with me today.
Thanks for having me.
This is really a remarkable story. I mean, what inspired you to tell it?
Well, as a filmmaker, I'm always looking for inspirational stories, somebody overcoming the odds. I think anything that could be a feature film or something cinematic like that always can make a good documentary. I had a friend who was involved in Deo's organization to bring health to Burundi, and he thought it would be an interesting documentary, so I got right on it. I didn't know much about Africa at that point. I actually never even knew where Burundi was.
You're probably not alone, I have to say.
No, not alone. And Burundi shares a culture with Rwanda and was just split in half by the Belgians during the Belgian colonial period. So it really is one country with this sort of artificial division.
And we talked a little bit about the Hutus and the Tutsis. I mean, just for those who don't know, now that you do know because you've researched a lot about it, what sparked this civil unrest and just how devastating was it, and it still is, for the country? It's
absolutely devastating, and it was stoked and almost created during the Belgian colonial period, where they would come in and measure people's faces. We show in the film, they would measure their noses and their cheekbones and their height and declare some people Tutsis and some people Hutus. And it was almost arbitrary because some people in the same family would be a Tutsi and somebody would be a Hutu. So it really didn't make much sense. But it took hold and got into the psyche of the people, and the Belgians wanted to divide and conquer, and that's what happened. And it persevered, and there have been several genocides perpetrated by both sides. And the one that Deo escaped from was in 1993, just before the Rwandan genocide.
It's a horrendous, act in history. We saw that. We're still continuing to see the effects today. How does somebody escape from that? I mean, you tell us how Deo's story in particular. I mean, how did he come to the United States?
Well, it's a remarkable story. The genocide happened overnight. The president of Burundi was killed, and it triggered this genocide to happen. And he was working in a hospital, a 20-year-old medical student. He always dreamt of being a doctor to help his country, because as a kid he saw many of his fellow classmates died of curable diseases. Half of them per year would die. So that's why he wanted to be a doctor. All of a sudden he heard that the country was at war. Next thing he knew, militiamen were in the hospital and he had to hide in his room. He was hiding in his room and he had no idea what was going to happen. They were killing people with machetes. He didn't have time to lock his door. As a result of not locking the door, someone entered as he was hiding under the bed, and they assumed that nobody was there. And they said, yeah, the cockroach is already gone. And that ended up saving his life. As we showed in the movie, when he came out, bodies, death everywhere. He ended up escaping to Rwanda for 6 months. The genocide sort of calmed down a bit in Burundi. He came back to Burundi. The country was an absolute mess, and he had a friend who had a little bit of money who offered to buy him a ticket to New York City. And he posed as a coffee salesman because Burundi has a lot of coffee. And he learned enough about coffee to get to New York. And he was actually interviewed by the border guards and didn't speak a word of English. They had to bring a translator in who was a baggage handler, a Senegalese baggage handler, to translate from French to English. And he basically was almost not admitted into the United States. But the baggage handler knew what was happening in Burundi, so he sort of shaded it for the border guards, and they let him in.
Wow.
And he came in with $200. The Senegalese baggage handler let him live in an abandoned tenement in Harlem with him, and that was it. He was in the United States with $200, which was gone soon, unable to speak the language, and lived in Central Park.
And you know, like you say, he lived in Central Park, and there's this sort of element of homelessness. I don't want to spoil the documentary for too many people that are watching. But talk to me about his own kind of personal journey, because he came all the way to the United States, and then we see this sort of return back to his home country.
That's right.
You know, lots of people will be watching and thinking, gosh, how on earth, why on earth would one want to go back there? What sort of prompted him to do so?
Well, you know, they say everybody always goes home in the end. He was working with an organization called Partners in Health in neighboring Rwanda, and he went back to visit his mother, who was ailing and sick. And he went to a hospital and found that it was complete devastation in the hospital. People were sharing an IV. They were rinsing the rubber gloves to be reused, completely unhygienic. And so he realized that his home country was almost devoid of any passable healthcare system. And so, having a history of losing all half of his childhood friends to preventable diseases, he always wanted to be in health and in medicine. So he decided he was going to follow his dream and build a health center in rural Burundi, and he named it Village Healthworks. So, you know, it's quite a story of redemption and overcoming the odds. I also like to point out that after living homeless and almost starving to death in Central Park, not only did he attend Columbia University, but through a twist of fate ended up going to Harvard.
Wow.
So, you know, if he can do it, if he can overcome the odds, why can't the rest of us? Everybody experiences loss of a relationship, loss of a loved one, but take a cue from Deo, who's had the ultimate loss and the ultimate horror, and overcome and given back. And what can you do to take that pain and loss and turn it into something positive?
Yeah, from hardship to true inspiration, really.
That's
Thank
right.
you so much for being with me
Thank
today.
you.
Well, really great to have you.